So Anthony, tell me, why is it so important when people are going to interviews for them to make a good first impression?
I think first impressions are the most important when going into any place. You know, the first impression, the first person that you come into contact with can just set the tone for the rest of your meetings. I think it's the most important.
Yeah, okay. And how can somebody go into an interview create a good first impression?
I think more than anything, the first person that you're probably going to come into contact with is a receptionist or a secretary.
Yeah.
So it's perhaps a nice smile, you know, just a nice greeting.
Yeah.
And it just gives you a nice warm feeling when they've greeted you in a nice, sort of respectable and friendly fashion as well. So
this is not even the person that's going to be interviewing you, is it? This is somebody who might be just on reception, you know, giving you your badge or something like that.
Yeah, but equally they can always go back to the person that is interviewing you and, you know, just pass on a message that, you know, you're very, very friendly, very respectable, and it just adds that second impression as well.
Yeah, and tell me, then the person that's coming to interview you, how do you make a good first impression with them? What can you do?
First impression, you know, a nice handshake.
Yeah.
Something just shows that you're confident, you know, that you're happy to greet, you're happy to be there.
Yeah.
And a nice smile, you know, a nice smile will always get you a long way. So I think that's...
A handshake's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you get that wrong, it's a bit too limp, you can see, you know, not that confident. A bit too hard, especially if you're greeting a female, can be a bit overbearing and masculine.
Absolutely.
So how do you make sure you get that right?
I think it's a bit of a strange one, but I would say, you know, never too limp.
Yeah.
Can always give the impression of not confident.
Yeah.
And that's not the impression that you want to make to any employee whatsoever. So equally too strong could be a bit, as you say, overbearing and too forceful. So, you know, the right balance, but, you know, eye contact is always important.
Yeah.
And a nice smile as well just gives a nice open approach.
Good to hear. So what else can you do then to give a good first impression then? You know, because it's quite awkward, isn't it? Sometimes you get met in reception, the meeting room you have to walk through offices to get to, and that silence can be a little bit awkward. So, you know, what do you do in that sort of situation?
No, absolutely. You know, it can always be awkward, but I'd always advise, you know, small talk. So, you know, before your meeting, perhaps a few points that you could speak to the person about prior to walking in. So, you know, if you've got nice brand new offices, you know, perhaps how long they've been at those particular premises. But I've always found the weather. Speaking about the weather, typical English weather, is always a good start as well. So,
are there any subjects you'd avoid if you were trying to, you know, have small talk or anything like that?
I would always avoid talking about your current employer at the time. That's something that's left to the interview. But anything that's negative, that puts, as you would say, a downer on anything, you don't want to bring up in any small talk again. I
guess relevant news and stuff like that, something that's been in the news today, anything relevant to the business might be good as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that all comes from your previous research, perhaps you've done on the business. If you've perhaps looked at their market share and you've noticed that the business are doing really well, and, you know, perhaps, you know, mentioning that you've read something recently in that particular day, or anything business related, and that sector, that's within that sector always gives a good impression. Also. Good.
And why is that small talk so important then in the context of making a good first impression? What does it achieve?
No, well, it shows you that it shows the employer that you're, you know, able to interact on things non-work related. That you're confident you can easily bring up you know, a daily conversation, but that you'll be able to interact with them going forward as well as perhaps the team. Should you be successful.
Okay. And I mean, are there any other sort of interesting tips that you might have for somebody, you know, going to an interview that they can use to help make a good first impression? I've
always found that, you know, perhaps carrying a nice presenter, so whether it be a nice leather presenter with a notepad, paper, and perhaps some key notes that you've made on the business beforehand, just naturally gives a good impression. It just shows that, you know, you're well organised, and that you've taken the time to perhaps jot some notes down if needed in the meeting. You never want to come empty-handed into any meeting that you go to.
We've got a good few points there on making a good first impression.
Yeah.
Let's just imagine you've had a great interview. How do you leave the whole process on a good positive note as well? What can you do then once the interview's over?
Yeah, well, ending's just as important as the beginning, really.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you brought what you've done in the interview to its end. So, for example, if you are sort of interested in the position, happy to go forward, you always want to leave on the note, what are the next stage? What are the next stages from here?
Yeah.
When can I expect to hear from you?
Yeah.
And also reiterating your interest, if that's the case.
Yeah.
Always reiterating your interest just shows you're interested in the role. You're keen to sort of set a second meeting, or accept the role should it be offered.
Yeah.
I've always found that initially your first impression will set the tone for the remainder of the interview.
Yeah.
So you often find that perhaps if you've made a good first initial impression, from there on, all of the positive things that you may mention in the interview will carry, positivity for the interviewer going forward. And perhaps if the impression hasn't been so positive at the beginning, perhaps they may sort of lead to the negative things that you may say.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that spoken about as the halo and horns effect of an interview. If you make a good first impression, someone spends the whole interview justifying that first impression and seeing the positive things that come out, and that's the halo effect. And then if you've made a bad first impression, unfortunately they'll pick out a lot of the negative things you say to justify their original impression, and in that you've got the horns effect. So it just proves that it's not only important from a first impression standpoint, but it could guide how the interview's going to go.
Yes, no, completely agree. I would always say importance of that first impression from the beginning, as we've spoken before, with the receptionist, right through to the small talk going in, can always set the right tone, so that can lead on to positivity going forward in your actual interview.
Good. And again, you're walking back, small talk again, I assume, pick up on what you haven't done, or pick up where you left off maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So small talk again is always a good one, as they're seeing you through to the door. And perhaps then it can be slightly more informal, without being too informal. So perhaps asking the question, any particular hobbies that you do outside of work, and it just shows again you're very relaxed, sort of confident to talk about anything outside of work as well. And people like to talk about themselves, don't they? So I think that's always a good one.
Get them talking.
Exactly.
Maybe keep them off certain subjects, like if they support a certain football team and you support a rival, don't tell them.
Perhaps if it's Aston Villa and Birmingham City, don't bring that one up. But I've always found that speaking about hobbies is always a good one. If we're in the summer months, is there anywhere you're going away for the summer holidays? Is always a good topic as well.
And then when you're leaving, the same as when you get there in terms of a handshake, eye contact, that sort of thing.
Exactly. So we're talking always maintaining eye contact, a nice smile with a moderate handshake as well, just to say nice to meet you. I've really enjoyed. Really enjoyed the meeting. I hope to hear from you soon. And sort of leaving it from there, I think, is probably the best way to go forward.
Okay, so if we were sort of summarising all of that then, so people that are going to interview should make sure that they treat everybody they meet in a positive way. So even the receptionist, make sure you smile, say hello, and be polite to them, because you never know if they're involved in the process. Have a good handshake, not too soft, not too firm, big smile, good eye contact, small talk on the way in to build rapport. Take a presenter with you to show that you're prepared. Perhaps talk about the business, the weather, or some other topic of interest. And then equally on the way out, make sure that you reiterate your interest in the post. Tell them that you've really enjoyed the meeting. Again, thank them for their time. Good eye contact. Good handshake.
No, absolutely, and that's the process, and hopefully you'll be on your way to perhaps the opportunity if you've carried all those things out in the way that you should have.
Great stuff. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Cheers.